The question of Jesus' racial identity has sparked intense debate and speculation for centuries. For many, the image of Jesus has been one of a light-skinned man, often portrayed with European features, especially in Western art and religious depictions. However, as global discussions about race, identity, and representation have grown, a new perspective has emerged, especially within African communities. What if Jesus was black? This thought-provoking question challenges not only historical understandings, but also the cultural and theological interpretations of millions. In this video, we'll delve deep into African perspectives on Jesus' true identity and explore the implications of this discussion. To understand the racial identity of Jesus, we must first consider the historical and geographical context in which he lived. Jesus of Nazareth was born in Judea, an ancient region that is now part of modern-day Israel and Palestine. He lived during the 1st century, a time when the population of this area consisted primarily of people from the Middle East. These people, including Jews, would have had features characteristic of the region: darker skin tones, brown eyes, and dark hair. The idea that Jesus would have looked like the average modern-day Middle Eastern person is supported by a great deal of historical evidence. Many scholars and anthropologists argue that given the region's climate and the time in which Jesus lived, he would not have had the pale skin often depicted in Western art. Instead, he would have had skin darker than those depictions, resembling the complexions of people from the Eastern Mediterranean or parts of North Africa. This opens up an interesting line of thought for many African communities. Why have Western representations of Jesus consistently portrayed him as a light-skinned European figure? And what does it mean for Black people to reclaim Jesus as someone who could have shared their experiences? For centuries, Western Christianity has portrayed Jesus in an image that reflects European ideals. From the Renaissance to modern-day Hollywood films, Jesus has often been depicted with long flowing hair, light skin, and blue eyes. These depictions were often influenced by European artists and their cultural norms, rather than being based on historical accuracy. The most famous example is the image of a white, often blonde-haired and blue-eyed Jesus, seen in countless paintings, stained glass windows, and film portrayals. However, this portrayal of Jesus raises important questions. Why was Jesus depicted in this way when the reality of his background suggests he would have had darker skin, as was typical for people from that region? The European portrayal of Jesus, especially in art and media, has often been linked to a broader cultural tendency to associate divinity and purity with whiteness, while simultaneously marginalizing people of color in religious representations. For many African communities, the depiction of Jesus as a white man has led to a sense of disconnection and alienation. Historically, Black people in Africa and the African diaspora have often been marginalized and underrepresented in religious imagery. The image of a white Jesus has been seen as a reflection of colonial oppression. European colonizers used Christianity to justify their dominance and control over African lands and people. In this context, a white Jesus was seen as a symbol of authority, while black people were forced to accept a religion that often felt foreign and disconnected from their own cultural and racial identity. This is where African perspectives on Jesus' racial identity begin to shift. Many African theologians and scholars have suggested that Jesus, like the people of the region he lived in, could very well have had black African features. This belief is rooted not only in historical analysis, but also in a desire for African people to see themselves reflected in the religious figures they worship. By reimagining Jesus as a black man, African communities are making a profound statement about race, identity, and inclusion in religious spaces. Reclaiming Jesus' identity as black has profound theological and cultural implications. For one, it challenges the historical narrative that often positions European culture and values at the center of Christianity. For many African Christians, reimagining Jesus as a figure who could relate to their struggles and experiences is empowering. It allows them to see Jesus not only as a divine figure, but as someone who understands their journey, someone who shares in the hardship and oppression that black people have faced. Throughout history, this shift also challenges colonial narratives that sought to suppress African culture and identity. By embracing a black Jesus, African communities are reclaiming their agency, affirming their identity, and rejecting the false notion that Christianity and African heritage are incompatible. This new understanding of Jesus brings about a sense of belonging, reminding black Christians that their faith is not only a universal message but one that is deeply connected to their own heritage and history. One of the most significant movements that has emerged from this discussion is Black Christology. Black Christology is a theological framework that examines the life and teachings of Jesus through the lens of the African experience. It seeks to understand Jesus not just as a savior for all humanity, but as a figure who stands in solidarity with the oppressed, including the black community. This theological movement emphasizes that Jesus' message of liberation, justice, and love aligns with the struggles of black people throughout history. The concept of a suffering servant, as described in the Bible, resonates deeply with African and African American communities who have endured centuries of oppression, slavery, and racial discrimination. In this light, Jesus is not just a distant historical figure, but a living symbol of hope and resistance for the oppressed. By focusing on Black Christology, African theologians and scholars challenge the historical tradition that has often overlooked the specific needs and experiences of black Christians. Instead of being marginalized, African believers are encouraged to view Jesus as someone who speaks directly to their lives and struggles. African artists have been at the forefront of reimagining Jesus as a black man. In recent years, we have seen a surge in African art that depicts Jesus with dark skin, reflecting the cultural and racial identity of African communities. These artistic depictions of Jesus are not just about aesthetics. They carry deep theological significance. They serve as a reminder that Jesus' message is universal, not confined to any single race or culture. In countries like Ethiopia, where Christianity has a long history, Depictions of Jesus have often reflected the physical appearance of the people in those regions. In these artworks, Jesus is shown with features common to the people of Africa: darker skin, curly hair, and sometimes even traditional African clothing. These representations help to bridge the gap between religious imagery and the lived experiences of African believers, showing that Christianity is not foreign to them but an integral part of their cultural heritage. This discussion about Jesus' race is not limited to the African continent alone. Across the African diaspora, including in the United States, the Caribbean, and South America, Black Christians are also reimagining Jesus in their own image. This global movement is part of a broader effort to reclaim African identity and culture in the face of centuries of colonialism, racism, and cultural erasure in the African American community. For example, the question of Jesus' race has been deeply tied to the struggle for civil rights and racial equality. For generations, African Americans have grappled with a religious tradition that often portrayed Jesus as a figure who was distant from their own realities. By embracing the idea of a Black Jesus, African Americans have found new ways to connect with their faith while asserting their dignity and humanity. This global conversation about Jesus's race serves as a powerful reminder that religion is not a static, monolithic tradition. It is something that can evolve and adapt to reflect the diverse cultures and experiences of the people who practice it. For African and African diaspora communities, reimagining Jesus as Black is a way of asserting their place in the global Christian community and rejecting the notion that their faith is any less valid or meaningful than that of any other race. The question of whether Jesus was Black is not just a theological one. It is a question of identity, representation, and power. For African communities, this debate is deeply personal. It is about reclaiming a part of their religious and cultural heritage that has been misrepresented or overlooked for centuries. By reimagining Jesus as a Black man, African Christians are not only affirming their own identity, but also challenging the dominant narrative that has often excluded them from religious imagery. While the historical evidence may never give us a definitive answer to the question of Jesus' racial identity, one thing is clear: the discussions surrounding Jesus' race are an important step toward building a more inclusive and diverse understanding of Christianity. Whether in art, theology, or everyday faith practice, African perspectives on Jesus' true identity are helping to reshape the way we understand this central figure in human history as we continue to explore the legacy of Jesus and his teachings. We should remember that the heart of his message transcends race, culture, and nationality. Jesus' message of love, justice, and liberation speaks to all people, regardless of their background or identity. In the end, the true identity of Jesus lies not in his skin color, but in his ability to unite, inspire, and transform the lives of people from all walks of life. If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to like, share, and comment below with your thoughts on the discussion. Do you believe Jesus' racial identity plays an important role in how we understand his message? Let's continue the conversation in the comments.